We all know Hitler shot himself when the Red Army closed in on Berlin, right? But what led to that moment? What were his last days like? How did Nazi Germany collapse before VA Day? Let's dive into it. It's me. Welcome to my channel. And today we're going to explore exactly how Hitler died and how Nazi Germany collapsed during its final days. On April 1945, with the Red Army now inside the city limits of Berlin, Adolf Hitler was bunker-bound. He refused to leave his underground lair despite pleas from his generals that it was hopeless and he should escape. Over the radio, he still confidently told the German people that victory was near, but even he knew that this was a lie. In fact, all around him were signs that the war was already lost. His foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop, had recently been sentenced to death by the International Court of Justice for planning the war with Poland, the news of which was received in the bunker in a sealed envelope by Hitler, who simply read it, put it down, and said nothing. This wasn't because he didn't care, but rather because he knew the game was up. Even so, he still refused to flee or surrender. As the Red Army grew closer, food supplies became more and more scarce. The electricity cut out, and the air raid sirens blared day and night. Those in the bunker with Hitler started to become desperate. Goebbels wanted to evacuate Berlin with Hitler's children, while Himmler, now captured by the British, was offering to negotiate peace deals behind the Führer's back. All the while, the Russian soldiers outside were digging in and preparing to take the city by storm. Even as everything fell apart, Hitler was stuck in his office, writing pointless orders. In April, he met with generals but refused to quit, saying, "I prefer death to dishonorable peace." During the Battle of Berlin, Hitler's chef Otto Lischke got hit by shrapnel and returned to the bunker. There, he found a shaken Hitler, insisting, "You don't get it. Russians are coming. We must fight." But even as he said this, the Red Army breached the outer defenses of Berlin and took over the Reichstag building, the seat of German government, which flew a white flag. Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, tried to rally support for the beleaguered leader, declaring in an April 1st broadcast, "We are confident that the Führer will achieve the final victory in the East as elsewhere." But the tone of his voice betrayed him, and many of those who heard the speech believed that it was recorded and that Goebbels was merely reading from a text provided by Hitler. Only the Führer could have sounded so resolute. Desperate to regain some control, Hitler ordered the construction of a new wall across Berlin to keep civilians from fleeing to the west. But as the weeks went on, he became more and more detached from reality. While the people in the bunker were struggling to stay alive, he was holding lavish dinners and speaking at length about his dream of a greater Germany. It seemed as though he'd completely blocked out the sounds of war raging just outside. But on April, after the Red Army took over the radio tower and began broadcasting to the citizens directly, the situation changed. Hitler emerged from his office, visibly shaken. After listening to the broadcast, he sank into a chair and whispered, "It's all over." At this point, only a miracle could save him, and none were forthcoming. The next day, Soviet troops entered the Chancellery, and the Führer's personal valet, Heinz Linge, later recalled. "When I looked out of the window, I saw Russian lorries driving into the courtyard. They were flying red flags. I turned pale and thought, now it's really serious, and it was." Later that evening, Hitler, along with the remaining members of his cabinet, signed a document officially surrendering the armed forces of Nazi Germany unconditionally to the Allies. Some reports say that as Hitler penned his signature, he began to cry. Despite all of his bravado, all of his promises of victory, all of his claims of invincibility, in the end, it seems the weight of his actions had finally caught up with him. His signature, unusually shaky, was the last official act of the Third Reich. With this, the war in Europe was over. Germany's collapse had come swiftly and violently, and with it, the world was free of one of its greatest evils. Or was it? See, although the surrender was unconditional, that didn't mean that Hitler was ready to give up. Later that day, still holed up in his bunker, Hitler wrote a counter-order saying German troops and citizens should stop fighting based on this declaration. So, while he was technically surrendering, he was still clinging to the hope of turning the war back in Germany's favor. While this was going on, chaos reigned in the streets above the bunker. Citizens were running for the hills or hiding from incoming artillery fire. Others barricaded themselves inside buildings, hoping that if they stayed perfectly still, they'd be invisible. Still, others were too afraid to leave their shelters at all. Outside, Russian tanks rumbled through the streets, kicking up dust and debris. Infantrymen patrolled the rooftops, searching for snipers. Medical services had long since broken down, and corpses littered the streets and parks. Looked like a scene straight out of Dante's Inferno. And yet in the middle of all this destruction, Hitler was still planning. The next day, April, he summoned his generals once again, along with several high-ranking members of the Nazi Party, and told them of his intentions to continue the war, to hold out in Berlin and fight until the bitter end. Then, as if to prove his point, he ordered the demolition of the Berlin Underground rail system, cutting off the remaining members of the German government from any hope of escape. As the minutes ticked by, it became clear that the leaders gathered around Hitler weren't going to talk him down. Desperation and defeat had stripped away any sense of reason, leaving only blind rage and a lust for vengeance. By the time the sun went down, the fate of Germany and the men inside the bunker with Hitler was sealed. Just before midnight, Hitler called his valet and dictated his final will. He was super distrustful of the Allies, convinced they'd never keep their promises. Once he wrapped that up, he asked Linge to bring in Eva Braun and their 2 kids from a separate bunker and married them right there. He handed Eva his will, wanting it published, and gave her his cufflinks and some jewels to keep. Lastly, he set up a second marriage contract for his valet and secretary Trottel Jung, leaving them everything he owned. At about 1 a.m., Hitler and Eva took a lethal dose of cyanide. Then, according to Linge, Hitler pulled out his pistol and shot himself in the head. Eva died almost immediately, but Hitler lingered for a little longer, eventually succumbing to his mortal wound. Their bodies were carried out of the bunker and burned. The ashes were placed in an urn and buried in a nearby garden. As the first rays of dawn illuminated the ruined city, Hitler was dead. Just hours later, Germany officially surrendered. Known as Victory in Europe Day or VA Day, May 8, 1945 marked the end of the Second World War in Europe. For the people of Berlin, the war was over, but the road to recovery would be long and hard. Much of the city lay in ruins, its people homeless and starving, but at least they were free. Free from the tyranny of Nazi Germany, free from the threat of Hitler and the horrors of war. As they surveyed the damage, they knew that it would take years to rebuild, but they also knew that they could do it. With the help of their allies, they would rise from the ashes and create a new Berlin. A city that would be a beacon of hope for the future. But we want to hear from you. What did you think of this video? Let us know in the comments below. And if you liked it, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching.